A flood, a warning, a handful of survivors watching their world disappear beneath the water. Most people know this story through Noah and the Ark. It has survived for thousands of years and become one of the most recognizable stories ever told. Yet the deeper its origins are traced, the stranger the story becomes. Because Noah is not where this story begins. Thousands of years before the story appeared in the Bible, people in ancient Mesopotamia were already telling tales of a flood that nearly destroyed humanity. At first, that might not seem surprising. Floods were a fact of life in the ancient world. What is surprising is what happens when you look beyond Mesopotamia. Stories of devastating floods appear in ancient Greece. They appear in India. Versions of the same idea can be found in China and in many other parts of the world. These cultures were separated by vast distances, spoke different languages, and developed independently of one another. Yet they all seem to remember the same thing. Not the details, not the names, just the flood. The oldest known versions of that story appear in Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Today, this region is often called the cradle of civilization. By around 3500 BCE, cities such as Uruk and Ur had emerged across southern Mesopotamia, supported by fertile farmland and the rivers that made large-scale settlement possible. Those rivers brought life to the region, but they could also bring destruction. Seasonal flooding was a reality of life, and when waters rose unexpectedly, entire communities could suffer the consequences. That helps explain why floods became part of Mesopotamian memory. What it does not explain is why those memories eventually became some of the oldest surviving stories in human history. One of the earliest appears in the Atrahasis epic, written around the 18th century BCE. In the story, humanity has grown so numerous that the gods decide to destroy it with a great flood. One man, Atrahasis, is secretly warned of what is coming. He is instructed to build a vessel, gather living creatures, and prepare for a disaster that will wipe out nearly everyone else. Centuries later, another flood survivor appears in one of the most famous works of ancient literature, the Epic of Gilgamesh. There, the survivor is known as Utnapishtim. His story begins with a warning. A catastrophic flood is coming. He is told to build a large vessel. He survives while the waters overwhelm the world around him. When the disaster ends, life begins again. The similarities are difficult to ignore. A warning, a vessel, the preservation of life, a flood that destroys almost everything. The details change, the names change, but the framework of the story remains remarkably familiar. These Mesopotamian accounts were already ancient, long before the book of Genesis was written. The flood story most people recognize today was not appearing for the first time. It was entering a tradition that had existed for centuries. Were these stories inspired by a real event? In the 1920s, British archaeologist Leonard Woolley thought he might have found an important clue while excavating the ancient city of Ur. Beneath layers of human occupation, his team uncovered a thick deposit of silt left behind by a major flood. The discovery attracted international attention. Some newspapers even suggested that evidence of the legendary flood had finally been found. The excitement did not last. As archaeologists continued excavating other Mesopotamian cities, the picture became more complicated. Flood deposits appeared at different locations, but they did not all date to the same period. Instead of pointing to a single catastrophe that swept across the entire region, the evidence suggested multiple major floods occurring over long stretches of time. What it did not confirm was a single disaster capable of explaining every version of the story. The Mesopotamian evidence helps explain where some of the earliest known flood narratives originated. It does not explain why similar narratives appear far beyond Mesopotamia itself. One of the first places this becomes apparent is ancient Greece. By the first millennium BCE, Greek writers were preserving the story of Deucalion. According to the tradition, Zeus became angered by humanity and decided to destroy it with a great flood. Only Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha survived. After the waters receded, they repopulated the world and humanity began again. At first glance, the similarities are difficult to miss. A devastating flood, a small number of survivors, a world renewed after catastrophe. But Greece lies hundreds of kilometers from Mesopotamia. Was this simply a story that traveled from one culture to another? Or was something else happening? The question becomes harder to ignore when the pattern appears again. Ancient Indian traditions preserve another flood narrative centered on a figure known as Manu. The story appears in texts compiled over many centuries, but its roots stretch deep into India's ancient past. According to the tradition, Manu is warned that a great flood is coming. He prepares for the disaster, survives, and becomes connected to the continuation of human life after the waters recede. Another warning, another flood, another survivor. By itself, that might not mean much. Stories often borrow from one another. Ideas travel. Traditions spread. Yet the flood keeps appearing. And the farther we move from Mesopotamia, the less straightforward the explanation becomes. Ancient China offers a good example. Rather than focusing on a single survivor escaping a world-ending flood, many Chinese traditions tell of catastrophic flooding that threatened entire regions. One of the most famous figures associated with these stories is Yu the Great, a legendary ruler traditionally placed around the early 2nd millennium BCE. Here, the emphasis is different. The story is not about surviving a flood. It is about confronting one. The details are different. The characters are different. Even the role of the flood is different. Yet water remains at the center of the story. Across different cultures, different languages, and different centuries, people kept returning to the same idea. Water as a force capable of destroying the world they knew. And Greece, India, and China are only part of the picture. Flood traditions appear throughout the Pacific. Versions of flood stories have been recorded among indigenous peoples in the Americas. Similar themes emerge in regions separated by vast oceans and thousands of years of history. Not identical stories, not identical disasters, but stories that seem to circle the same question. What happens when the water rises and does not stop? Faced with so many similarities, some people reached what seemed like an obvious conclusion. Perhaps these stories were preserving the memory of a single catastrophe. Perhaps, somewhere in the distant past, humanity really had experienced a flood so immense that it left a mark on cultures around the world. It is an appealing idea. It is also a difficult one to prove. Stories can preserve memories. They can also change, spread, merge with other traditions, and take on new meanings over centuries. Similar accounts do not automatically point to the same event. If a single catastrophe stood behind all of these traditions, there should be traces of it somewhere beyond mythology. Something physical, something measurable, something that survived long after the stories were first told, and that is exactly what people began searching for. If flood traditions appeared across so many cultures, perhaps they were preserving the memory of a real catastrophe. It was a simple idea, and for centuries it inspired explorers, historians, archaeologists, and religious scholars to look for evidence that such a disaster had actually occurred. Some searched for the flood itself. Others searched for the vessel that was supposed to have survived it. One location attracted more attention than any other: Mount Ararat in eastern Turkey. For generations, stories connected the mountain with Noah's Ark. Expeditions visited the region throughout the 20th century. Pilots reported strange shapes on remote slopes. Photographs circulated. Claims appeared in newspapers and books. Again and again, people believed they might be on the verge of solving one of history's oldest mysteries, yet every promising lead eventually ran into the same problem. The evidence never held up. Objects thought to be parts of the Ark could not be verified. Unusual formations turned out to have natural explanations. The searches continued, but a definitive discovery remained out of reach. Mount Ararat was not the only place researchers looked. Archaeologists had already uncovered evidence that major floods occurred in Mesopotamia. Discoveries such as the flood deposits at Ur confirmed that destructive flooding was part of the region's history, but they did not point to a single catastrophe capable of explaining flood traditions around the world. Even so, the search continued. Then, in 1997, two geologists named William Ryan and Walter Pittman proposed an idea that captured worldwide attention. According to their hypothesis, around 5,600 BCE, rising waters from the Mediterranean Sea broke through into the Black Sea basin. If the event unfolded as they suggested, enormous volumes of water may have flooded previously inhabited land, transforming the landscape and forcing people to abandon their homes. For many observers, the idea seemed to connect several pieces of the puzzle at once. It involved a real flood. It occurred thousands of years before the earliest written flood stories, and it was dramatic enough to leave a lasting impression on the people who experienced it. Some even suggested that memories of such an event could have survived for generations before eventually becoming part of the flood traditions recorded in Mesopotamia and elsewhere. For a time, the Black Sea hypothesis appeared to offer something earlier discoveries could not, a possible bridge between geology and mythology. But once again, the picture became more complicated. As additional research was published, questions began to emerge. Some researchers argued that the flooding may have been less sudden than originally proposed. Others questioned whether the event could be connected to later flood traditions at all. The Black Sea hypothesis was not disproven. It simply proved harder to confirm than many people expected. Researchers continued uncovering clues that seemed to explain part of the mystery, but none could explain all of it. Flood deposits showed that catastrophic flooding had occurred in many places. Traditions surrounding Mount Ararat kept interest in Noah's Ark alive. Submerged landscapes revealed that entire regions had once existed where water now stood. Each discovery appeared to illuminate a different piece of the puzzle. Yet the deeper the search went, the harder a single worldwide catastrophe became to support. What emerged instead was a different realization. Water really had transformed enormous parts of the world, but not through one event occurring at one moment in history. And the evidence for that story was not hidden in myths. It was hidden beneath the sea. Around 20,000 years ago, during the last glacial maximum, the world looked very different. Vast ice sheets covered large parts of North America, Northern Europe, and Asia. So much water was locked away in ice that global sea levels stood roughly 120 meters, or 390 feet lower than they do today. The difference was not just geological, the map itself was different. Coastlines extended far beyond their modern boundaries. Areas that are now submerged beneath oceans and seas were once open landscapes crossed by rivers, forests, grasslands, and migration routes. People hunted there, traveled there. In some cases, they may have lived there for generations. Then the ice began to melt. The process took thousands of years, but the result was enormous. As sea levels gradually rose, coastlines retreated and entire regions disappeared beneath the water. One of the most famous examples is Doggerland. Today, the area lies beneath the North Sea between Britain and mainland Europe. For thousands of years after the end of the Ice Age, however, it was a vast landscape inhabited by hunter-gatherers. Archaeologists have recovered evidence of human activity from the seabed, including stone tools, animal remains, and traces of the world that once existed there. To the people living in Doggerland, the transformation would not have appeared as a line on a map. It would have been personal. A familiar coastline moved farther away. Land used for hunting disappeared beneath the water. Rivers changed course. Places known for generations slowly vanished. The final stages of Doggerland's disappearance likely unfolded over many centuries, although a massive underwater landslide off the coast of Norway triggered the Storegga tsunami around 6200 BCE. The tsunami may have affected parts of the remaining landscape, but rising seas had already been reshaping the region for thousands of years. Doggerland was not unique. Far to the southeast, another lost world existed across what is now Indonesia, Malaysia, and the surrounding region. During the Ice Age, lower sea levels exposed a vast area of land known as Sunderland. Forests, rivers, and plains connected territories that are now separated by water. As sea levels rose, much of that landscape disappeared beneath the sea as well. Researchers have identified similar stories in other parts of the world. Again and again, the evidence points toward coastlines changing, landscapes shrinking, and communities adapting to environments that looked dramatically different from those of today. Could large numbers of people have experienced destructive flooding and disappearing land? The evidence shows that they did. Researchers searching for a single catastrophe instead found a long history of environmental change unfolding across thousands of years. Not one lost world, many lost worlds. Not one flood, many floods. A single worldwide flood capable of covering the entire planet leaves very different evidence than rising seas, regional catastrophes, and changing coastlines. The more researchers studied the geological record, the more the second explanation matched what they found. Rising seas could help explain why stories about destructive water appear so often across human history. They could even explain why some cultures remembered land disappearing beneath the sea. but they do not explain why flood traditions from different parts of the world sometimes share remarkably similar elements: warnings, survivors, vessels, and the idea of beginning again after the water recedes. Those details would lead researchers toward a very different explanation. Perhaps the question was wrong from the beginning. For centuries, people searched for a flood large enough to explain every flood story. They searched mountains, ancient cities, coastlines, and the seafloor itself. Yet the deeper the investigation went, the more difficult it became to connect every tradition to a single event. What if the similarities between these stories were not pointing toward one disaster? What if they were pointing toward something much more common? Nearly every major civilization in history developed near water. Rivers provided drinking water, fertile farmland, transportation and trade. Coastlines connected communities to food and resources. Water made civilization possible, but it also made civilization vulnerable. Floods could arrive with little warning. Rivers could overflow their banks. Storm surges could erase entire settlements. Coastlines could change within a lifetime. For people living in the ancient world, destructive water was not an abstract possibility. It was a recurring reality, and when communities survive something extraordinary, they tend to remember it. Long before writing became widespread, stories helped preserve important knowledge. They carried lessons, warnings, and memories from one generation to the next. Over time, details could change, characters could be added, separate traditions could merge together. But the core experience often remained recognizable. A community survives a devastating flood. People remember who saw the danger first, who survived, what was lost, and what happened afterward. Over time, those memories can become stories, and those stories often preserve the same kinds of details. A warning before disaster, a survivor, a means of escape, and a world that feels permanently changed. These elements do not necessarily require a single global catastrophe. They can emerge naturally from human experiences shared across different places and different times. At the same time, not every similarity can be dismissed as coincidence. Ancient cultures traded with one another. Ideas traveled. Stories crossed borders along with merchants, migrants, and explorers. Some flood traditions may have influenced others. The Mesopotamian stories, for example, were already ancient by the time later civilizations began recording their own versions. The evidence does not point toward a single worldwide flood, remembered by every culture on Earth. But it does not suggest that every flood story developed in complete isolation either. Instead, the traditions seem to reflect a combination of real disasters, cultural exchange, and the universal human need to make sense of catastrophe. People living near water faced many of the same dangers. They experienced loss, they survived, and they told stories about it. Perhaps that is why flood myths continue to appear across so many cultures, not because every civilization was remembering the same event, but because many of them were trying to explain experiences that felt remarkably similar. A river that destroyed a settlement, a coastline that disappeared beneath the sea, a community forced to rebuild after catastrophe. The details changed from place to place, but the emotions behind the stories remained familiar. Communities trying to understand disaster, communities trying to preserve memory, communities trying to imagine a future after everything had changed. If this story stayed with you, let it travel. Like the video. Subscribe if you haven't. We searched for one flood. Instead, we found thousands of years of human memory. The search continues here on Riddle Me This Mysteries.